Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Chat and Chill, the exclusive. I'm your host, Tyra Martin, and I'm super excited about the content we have today. I don't know how many people have caught it yet, but there's a show on Showtime called The Good Lord Bird, and it takes a look at the life of John Brown, herald abolitionist, and his relationships with Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, and the famed Harper's Ferry raid that he tried to pull off, really looking to incite what would eventually become the Civil War. I sat down with the cast, which includes Daveed Diggs as an incredible Frederick Douglass, and Ethan Hawke in a continued expression of his unbelievable talent as John Brown. Let's take a look.
Everybody got God on their side in the war. Trouble is, God ain't telling nobody who he's for.
My name is Captain John Brown! And I am here in the name of the great King of Kings! The Holy Redeemer! The Man of Trinity! Because he is on the side of justice! And you are on the side of change!
Whatever he believed, he believed. Didn't matter if it was true or not. The old man was nuttier than a squirrel turd.
For a shameless hypocrisy, America reigns without a rival! Amen! 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 John, go! Get out! Lunatic. Onion, you've been reading the Bible?
Not too much, Captain, but I've been thinking this golly way.
We can work with that. You stand for the Lord will stand for you!
Hello, fellas.
Hello.
I love this project. I love, Ethan, you have never failed, honestly. If you've done something bad, I haven't seen it.
Oh, good.
I'm not gonna search for it.
Please don't. You'll find it, but don't search.
I love every role you choose, and you bring this passionate, provocative, pious nut to life in just the most tangible and delicious way. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for saying that. That means the world.
What did you guys know about John Brown? Because this is it's a great time for these kinds of stories, because people are, for better or worse, because of the circumstances, desperate for a touch point to this part of American history, and to see what allyship looks like. I can't think of a better or more extreme example of allyship than John Brown. But what did you know about this story or this era in history, either of you?
Why don't you take it, Joshua?
Well, I did know a lot about John Brown and the history of Harper's Ferry, because as I was auditioning for the project, I was actually learning about John Brown in school. And so it did really help a lot with my research about who John Brown really was, and what his reasoning behind raiding Harper's Ferry was. And so the knowledge helped a lot.
For me, it's growing up in this country, he's a lightning rod, because I was born in Texas and my parents split up and my mom moved east, and I was like a kid in Vermont, right? And in Vermont, you'd hear him talk about John Brown like a good Christian man, And in Texas, you'd hear the tale of the lunatic of the War of Northern Aggression, And you start to see how people lie to themselves about, and how young people grow up not knowing what really happened and really this phrase everybody uses now is systemic racism, right? But if you really want to talk about it, you got to go back and you got to figure out the architecture of this country and how it's built. Because if you want to heal it, if you want to fix it, you got to look at it, and if you don't look very deeply, then your fixes end up being superficial. If you don't deal with zoning, the way this country was built, it's built on a lot of faulty ideology, and if you're not willing, if you can't say that, and John Brown lets you talk about it, and McBride gives us the opportunity to talk about it with love and humor. I mean, you could write a very different version of John Brown, but McBride sees the whole story through Joshua's character. A young kid who'll do anything to stay alive. He'll put on a dress. I'll do whatever I got to do to stay alive, folks. He's got no agenda, no politics. He just wants people to like him and get something to eat, right? Like most of us, right? And, maybe get a kiss every now and then if that's not too much to ask, right? And by telling the story that way, you allow for light and love and possible healing conversation to happen.
Yeah. Real quick, as we get out of here, what is the call to action for this? Because TV and streaming and all of these new elements of media have an ability to do more than we ever saw. Certainly you and I, Ethan, in our age demo, saw on TV. What's the call to action? Because this is informational and it's entertaining for sure, but then what?
Well, hey, that's the fundamental question you're asking. I mean, we're in a place right now where unfortunately, our athletes are leading, our artists are leading, we have, as Harriet Tubman says in the show, you're standing on the doorstep of change, you just got to walk through it. And McBride, how he would answer that is, the show shows you that the blood has already been spilled. The door has been broken and a lot of blood was spilled. We don't have to do that anymore. We just have to walk through it. We have to walk through it with the knowledge of right and wrong, and we have to walk through it together, and we have to help each other. It's hard to do, but you see it, it's happening. I mean, it's happening, and I hope that this show can be a part of the constant continuing of making it easier to talk about the hurtful things. Because if we don't talk about them, they're just going to stay hurtful.
Yeah, they don't go away.
They don't go away. We keep hoping it goes away, but it doesn't.
Joshua, and the last question, this is kind of on you and your generation now. There's still stuff that we have to do, but everyone is looking to you guys, and it's at a time of great change. Is that pressure, or do you guys, and you're now the spokesperson for all of you, but is there pressure there, or do you feel like, I'm fit for this challenge, I'm ready to go?
Me personally, I take it as fuel. No, I'm really ready to go and be a part of the generation that changes America and really brings everybody together.
Awesome. Thank you. So good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good. Thank you.
Take care. What a great time for this project. And it sounds ridiculous to say it's timely because there's no era in history where this would not be great and informational and entertaining content. But right now, when people are so hungry for any point of connection to American history, but certainly the Black experience in American history and what allies look like. I mean, find me a bigger ally than John Brown.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how this is really going to connect right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, my favorite thing about the piece, and this is really a tribute to how James McBride operates, all of his novels do this, is that the nuance involved, it doesn't shy away from it. He doesn't try to make an important story by stripping away all of the nuance and just like preaching a message at you, right? It lets people be flawed, it lets people be people and have concerns that are pedestrian, and all of the acts of their life lead up to incredible things. And I think that's sort of instructive for all of us, that like you don't have to, you can still be human and be a hero, you know? Right. And I think in times like this, we're really looking for everybody to find the heroic side of themselves, and acknowledge it, and recognize that you have the power to start to change things. And so, yeah, and I think it does such a great job of complicating so many things, you know, and so many of the things that we rely on, the religion, you know, John Brown's connection to religion, which is his everything. And John Brown is a lunatic, and he's also right. You know, he is also right. And you end up admiring, I mean, Ethan's performance is insane, because you end up really admiring this guy, this lunatic, and like seeing the parts of yourself that could maybe come close to doing the things that he accomplished, you know? Yeah,
with those two sides exist in everyone. It's just whether you have learned to access just enough of it to get good stuff done.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I love what it does with Frederick Douglass, because he, you know, he's that is one of the most revered figures in American history, and particularly in African American history. And he, but it's told through the eyes of Onion, and Frederick Douglass was also a rock star. That's what we don't talk about. He was the most famous person in the world, the most photographed. More people knew Frederick Douglass's face than anybody else's face at the time. And so what are the things that come with that kind of celebrity, and what is his ego like, and what, you know, those things are real and human too, and they don't take away from the writing that he was doing, which was also abolitionist propaganda. It was also really pointed. It was about, I am writing these versions of my childhood in order to free the slaves. Like, that is the mission of me writing these autobiographies and going out and having and telling all of these speeches. Frederick Douglass had a goal in mind, and he wasn't mad at changing history a little bit in order to achieve that goal. He was, you know, he was very focused and very conscious of what he was doing. Yeah. So getting to play someone like that and not have to put him on a pedestal, but getting to make him someone who does, like, the weight of the world gets really heavy, and you want to have a drink with this, like, kind of cute girl, what you think is a girl, you know, like, who's in your house, like.
Yeah, I would imagine as an actor, that's an amazing opportunity to take on a character like that, and to do it, you know, in a way that you can show his humanity.
Yeah.
Last question. It's a great time for episodic TV. You are entering into that foray again. Has streaming and quarantine changed the limits of what you can do on TV now, or what's perceived as TV?
Well, I mean, you know, there's a huge, people want content, and they want content that continues to come out, because a lot of us are really inside right now. The other side of that coin is it makes shooting that content very hard to do safely. And so, the industry is really in the middle of trying to figure out how to tell stories in kind of a new world. And it's a trip. I mean, I'm back up finishing season 2 of Snowpiercer with a whole different set of rules that we shot the first half of the season with, and it's hard. We're in pre-production for the Blind Spotting TV show, and we're like going through the COVID protocols right now, trying to figure out, well, what are the ways that we can lean into this moment and do something that is not pretending that we don't have limitations on it. Like, what are the successes of the limitations? What can we really use to make sure this is safe and beautiful? So, you know, it's an interesting puzzle to figure out. And definitely the way we make television is changing, probably forever. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's leading to a lot of innovation and a lot of real focus on the things that matter, again, like story. So.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I'm so excited for you and for Blind Spotting and all of the doors that just keep opening, opening, opening. So
Yeah,
awesome. Thank you.
thanks so much.
So tell me about, I hate to say that the timing on the project is uncanny because I can't imagine that there would ever have been a time that this was not entertaining information, like a docu into whatever hybrid of history, a snapshot of American history brought with some entertainment. But it just seems that people of all demographics right now are very engaged in learning more about what this country's history is, but in a way that they find palatable. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Well, that's it. I mean, that's the whole point of the Good Lord Bird. I mean, it's the point of all my work. You know, I was raised by a white woman, but we lived in the Black community. And so Black culture was always part of my life. But I understood early on that as great as that culture was, it wasn't any better than any other culture. The fact that I was raised Christian didn't mean that I was, you know, that I looked down on someone, that I was a Baptist, that I, you know, I didn't like Catholics. I mean, we weren't, I wasn't raised in that kind of circumstance. So I've always felt that this whole, you know, the race business was it's something that's very hard for people to talk about. And part of that is because the history of this country is rooted in these legendary figures that really not as great in some cases as we thought they were. In some cases, they're greater or than we ever knew, or we didn't know about them at all. Most people don't even know who John Brown is.
Right.
I mean, he is truly the great, you know, for lack of a better term, white American hero, because this is a guy whose conscience drove him and his family literally to death. I mean, he fought against slavery at a time when few people would. People spoke out against it. But John Brown actually fought against it. And he was an old man at the time. He was 59 at the time. He was old. So he was wise. He was very religious. But how do you tell this story in a way that makes people laugh and makes them say, you know, you don't want to tell a boring story with, you know, you just want to, you don't want people to say, you don't want to say, take your medicine. Because that assumes that, you know, like all Black people are great, you know. I know some bums, I wouldn't go near them. Really. So you have to give, you know, you have to give all Americans the whole wide story and let them decide for themselves what was right or what was wrong without judging. So that's why it's funny. That's why it's put in the voice of a 12-year-old kid who's pretending to be a girl who's watching this wacky old crazy old guy. Because I really wanted, you know, viewers and readers to see that this John Brown is us. This is us. It doesn't matter that it happened more than 200 years ago. It's the same story, but now we can unravel our history a little bit better by seeing what happened in the past.
And you've got the nuggets tucked in there deliciously and covert, and you are kind of getting that message before you realize it. One, though, that struck out, I believe it was the first episode that was just clear as a bell, was that America has got to deal with slavery. That whatever this promise is in the Kumbaya moment is not going to happen until we deal with slavery. We're still in that spot. Historians have tried to warn us, academics have warned us, creatives have warned us. What?
Well, I mean, our young people are starting to listen. I mean, that's the good news of now, because I never thought I'd live long enough to see young, you know, people of all colors walking around holding signs that say Black Lives Matter. I mean, George Floyd was he became you know, we know what he became. It's my hope that people understand that before George Floyd existed, John Brown knew what that pain was. And he wanted to stop that pain. And I think he'd be disappointed to know that we're still fighting the same battles over something as really as stupid as culture and skin. I mean, it doesn't matter what, you know, truly it doesn't matter what you are on the outside. I mean, it's such a pedestrian idea that we would, you know, we would elect officials and let stupidity reign because our sense of identity is somehow disturbed by the, you know, by the equal humanity of someone who is different than us, who dances different or eats different or looks different, or is too fat or too thin or too white or too black. I mean, it's all, you know, John Brown he talked about humanity, and he did it in a way that was touching, and that was effective. And that's why we're still talking about him. I will add, we're not talking about any single hater from that period. Nobody remembers the haters. Oh, well, they remember the gigantic ones, you know, Adolf Hitler and so forth. But nobody remembers, you know, the haters from down the street. And history doesn't recall. They just remember they're part of that swell. But history remembers the good people, the people who have tried to enact change. Maybe not the way we want, but people like John Brown will pop up again and again until somebody says, I had enough. Let's share that story with the rest of the world. So we're living in a time when we can actually have something like this on television. So it gets into American homes and homes across the world. And that's a sign of progress, I think.
Yep.
I hope.
I think so. And I certainly hope so. And I can't wait to recommend this as soon as this hits the ground for everybody that didn't get those super awesome links that we got. Thank you so much. And congratulations on a really, really well done translation to TV.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your insightful comments and your kind words.
Thank you. Obsessed. Obsessed with this project. This is the third week coming up for The Good Lord Bird on Showtime, 8 o'clock here in Chicago, and doing really, really well. Joining me right now, we have Cynthia Blair, Director of the African American Cultural Center, Associate Professor of the Department of African American Studies and the Department of History at University of Illinois, Chicago. Cynthia, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here and to talk about this amazing cultural document, right?
So one of the things that we've seen for the last few years, and I would guess that the first real peak of it was maybe 12 Years a Slave, when we started really seeing these stories, brought to large audiences, diverse audiences, with some fictionalized element to kind of make it a little more palatable, or to tell a story that sometimes can't be told in an hour and a half or 2 hours. And so since then, there was the Nat Turner film that didn't do as well because of a bunch of controversies, but was a really well-told story. Harriet as of late, and now we're looking at things on episodic TV. There's The Watchmen, there is Lovecraft Country, and this, The Good Lord Bird. What do you think as a historian about taking these major pole marks in American history, quite frankly, and bringing that fictional element in to help tell the story?
Well, I think I think you've kind of put your fingers on it, that something's going on, right? In this cultural moment where we need to use fiction, whether it's television, episodic television, whether it's film, whether it's literature, as a way to process a history and historical facts and institutions of history that we have yet to grapple with as a nation. So I think what we're seeing is both kind of a convergence of the fact that people of color are increasingly in the position to have their visions and voices heard and expanded in these spaces. But we're also on the audience side, seeing young people, and not just young people, but people who have hungered for not to necessarily say their story, because it's not just Black folks who are watching these stories, but that there is a hunger for really sensitive, creative ways of grappling with US history. And we haven't done that in any consistent and honest way, I think, in previous periods in popular culture anyway.
Yeah, maybe Roots, if we go all the way back, maybe was kind of the first trickling of that. So let's talk about, oh, I'm sorry, what were you gonna say?
I was just going to say, I think like Roots, and I don't remember who, maybe it was David or maybe it was James McBride himself was saying about you don't want to make people take a pill, right? You don't want people to tell people that, okay, here's medicine, you need to take it. This is how you need to absorb this history. And I think Roots was both, the kind of medicine of Roots was necessary at that time, and people were really receptive to it in the wake of the civil rights era. And you know, the 70s was ripe for this way of dramatizing and coming to terms with the history of slavery in the US. But now I think audiences want both that history and a little, the kind of nuances that we're beginning to see more often in film, and certainly in Good Lord Bird. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's okay. Let's go back to that time, because as this story reveals itself over the next 5 weeks or so for folks that are watching at home, there are a lot of relationships that we see develop with figures of history that I think most people don't really understand were working together. Let's talk about first John Brown's relationship with Frederick Douglass.
Well, that was a relationship that is both kind of complicated and also a useful way for us to think about more broadly abolitionism, right? So abolitionism being a movement that was not spearheaded by one person, you know, as we kind of tend to think, but it was a movement across the North and to a lesser extent pockets in the South, but it was a movement that drew people from certainly the Northeast, but a wide range of people into a circuit of conversation, a circuit of exchanging of ideas, and certainly supporting each other in their local fight for the end of slavery. So what we see is the overlap of the abolitionist movements, like Rochester, New York, for Douglass, and you know, the Upper South for John Brown, right? So their relationship was, you know, one of mutual respect. Their strategies and the tools that they would use to both announce the need for the end of slavery and to push for the end of slavery were different. Douglass being an orator, being a writer, being someone who was very good at managing his public persona, whether it's through photography or the way that he presented himself through the various forms of writing, right? But over the years, we see Douglass initially using moral persuasion as a way to encourage people to realize the harm and the moral bankruptcy of slavery. We see him drawn increasingly to understand that violence was a way, perhaps was the only way that we could end the institution of slavery in the United States. And that brings him into conversation with John Brown in various moments, right? And it gets him both to invite further correspondence with him, but also we see his own reticence. You know, we begin to see his reticence at what kind of violence, what's the nature of violence, and like, how do we plan violence that will be effective in toppling the institution of slavery?
Because there's some arguments that could be, I mean, reasonably be made that John Brown was engaged in terrorism.
So I think what is so fascinating about John Brown and what's so interesting about thinking about him now is, you know, we have a certain image of what terrorism means and what it is. And we're applying it to this historical moment in a way that separates John Brown from his historical moment, right? If we think about John Brown, and not just John Brown, but all who would support and try to imagine ways to resist and undermine slavery, if we think about that, they're living and struggling and fighting in a context that is violence, right? The institution of slavery is a violent institution, and it's supported by all manner of violence, whether it's interpersonal, within the slave household, within the slave on a plantation. It's the use of state and local force to maintain the institution of slavery. It's the use of federal force to support the owning, especially after 1850 with the Fugitive Slave Act, the support, the maintenance of the ownership of people. So we have all layers of violence that take place daily to support and to continue the institution of slavery. So John Brown comes out of a recognition that, and eventually Douglass as well, that, trying to talk people into understanding that slavery is wrong is not enough. That hasn't worked for 40 years. Right, with the beginning of anti-slavery movement. That hasn't really done much other than kind of build an anti-slavery cohort, but not a cohort that actually has a strategy, the strategy that can actually affect Southern and undermine Southern power within the federal government, and certainly the economic power of the South and the North's intertwined relationship with that. So violence is at the heart of slavery. And John Brown comes out of a recognition that how do you undermine violence, right? And so I would transform that understanding of terrorism and ask people to think historically about how violence is framed within this very specific context.
Mm-hmm. And just one more point about his kind of muddled reputation, I guess, maybe if that's the way, or the way his story is told. Prior to Harper's Ferry, one of the reasons the government was so, outside of whatever political and financial economic interests there were in curbing him, he had murdered several people prior to that, under, as you say, the understanding that this is a firefight, and I've got to bring fire with me. And so I wonder, if I could myself all the way back there to talk to Frederick Douglass. At some point, he encounters Harriet Tubman in his road toward the Harper's Ferry raid. What were her thoughts about the way he was doing this work?
I think it's the show represents her as supportive of Harper's Ferry, right? Because it's a plan, it's, and it kind of matches our understanding of who Harriet Tubman was, right? I think it's both unclear. I mean, it's clear that she supported John Brown in a general way. I don't know how specific her support goes to like this very specific plan in real life, right? But I do think, again, the fact that they're all kind of occupying the same universe of strategizing about how to bring about the demise of slavery, reflects that there's a shared language, if not a shared consensus about strategy.
Mm-hmm. And as far as strategy goes, there was kind of, I guess, an abolitionist Avengers within this Secret Six. This series is the first I've heard of that organization, where it was a group of people who kind of decided what things were going to get the support, how resources were going to be doled out. How did we miss all of this in history? I mean, I'm a college educated, reasonably woke person who had never heard of the Secret Six and was fascinated.
I'll tell you, I think what's sexier, right? Or what both is historically useful and what is sexier. You have this lone figure those who do know about John Brown may have just this vague notion that he was kind of a lunatic out to undermine slavery and, took Harper's Ferry. He was crazy, right? So we have this lone person who is out there. It's almost the way that we, in a completely different way, the way that we think about or have represented Rosa Parks as an individual who, I'm just tired, when we know that she was an activist in the NAACP and that her act was a strategy, was a plan.
Most people don't know that though, Cynthia. Most people still don't know that.
We still don't. Well, that's frustrating, but you know, our job is to get that out there, right? So what we tend to look at individuals, I guess my point is that we tend to look at individuals, whether saviors or demons, as an explanation for much more complicated historical moments and historical events. And so he stands out both as this, you know, quite sensational figure, but also a figure that undermines or can undermine the argument for the use of violence. Because, you know, he was extreme, he was an extremist. And, you know, once you have an extremist, that shuts down our understanding of process, you know, the ways that, you know, people actually rallied to the cause of anti-slavery and radical abolitionism.
Let's talk about Harper's Ferry and what went wrong.
Well, I think, you know, I think the film did a good kind of mix of trying to portray the many things that went wrong. I mean, we could think logistically, just it was well planned in one sense, but the plan was predicated on things that didn't come about, right? So the reinforcements, that didn't happen. His firm belief that slaves would just rally, the enslaved and free Blacks as well, would rally to the cause and find their way to Harper's Ferry, right? It's in a way, it's both a fascinating hope, right? It's a hope that seems like beyond what is hopeful, but it's extreme in a moment of extreme, you know, its response to an extreme situation. But also he, you know, I think the show kind of shows, well, he kind of he stuck around a little later than he needed to, right? And both the novel and the show suggest that there was some kind of strategy in that as well. Like he is trying to, once the initial plan of using the arms to free slaves and to therefore, you know, kind of march south and undermine slavery, that once that goes awry, then a different plan gets, you know, is in place. And that is, you know, the martyrdom story, that this is going to be a moment that people will remember as, you know, an important match that will light the fire under anti-slavery folk. So both of those moments, or both of those issues, are kind of undermine the efficacy of the actual raid. But I would say that what's more important than, like, did Brown actually bring about the end of slavery, right? Did he get those arms and did he launch a civil war? I think what's more important about him is what he tells us about the time, on the one hand, what he tells us about slavery, what he tells us about abolitionism, what he tells us about, you know, for those of us interested in how religion was at the heart of abolitionism, or Christianity in particular was at the heart of that. But also what he tells us about our own understanding of violence, and the violence of slavery, and the need for some type of violent reckoning, you know, and why was a civil war necessary at all? He kind of sets up that discussion for us in a way that I think is really useful. So I think rather than think about what failed, I think we should be asking, what does he tell us? Like, what do we learn from him? Both the failure, I mean, but in a sense, we don't really care about the logistics. What we care about is the symbolism, and what we care about is the meaning. And that gets to, like, the opening of the film. What is it? This is all true, and some of it happened.
Right.
The connection between facts and truth, you know, it's not a one-to-one correspondence.
Yeah.
So I think that's how we have to think about John Brown in general.
And to your point, whether you want to consider it a failure or just a one domino in the row that kind of led us to where we are now, it had an effect on a number of things. Politics. Let's talk a little bit about how this kind of set the path for Lincoln, basically, with party politics.
Well, I mean, it gave Lincoln a very, like a tightrope, a tightrope to walk. How do you support the end of slavery, or how do you use the end of slavery for the Northern cause on the one hand, without seeming to support the violent overthrow of a Southern institution? And again, John Brown becomes a symbol for pro-slavery forces. It becomes a symbol within his own party for those who are worried about the use of the uncontrolled use of violence.
Mm-hmm.
And, especially early on, there was the belief that we could actually, war is necessary, but it's not, the extent of the war can be contained by doing these piecemeal measures. So he's piecemealing it as he's, kind of supporting the war effort, but still initially with the hope that the South will come to its senses and not necessarily put an end to slavery, but at least put an end to the expansion of slavery and not push for that, as was part of, the fight over slavery, not necessarily its existence in the South, but its spread in the West.
What's the time stretch between John Brown's hanging, because he was hanged for the raid at Harper's Ferry, and the Civil War?
I'm doing my math, like 4 years.
Okay. So when people say he lit the flame, what are your thoughts as a historian?
I would say there are many matches, right? Okay. There were many matches. And those matches were both, this sensational case, which I think did have a lot of weight in the ways that both anti-slavery and pro-slavery folks talked about the impending crisis. But there were matches all over the South and matches all over the North. And we can think about, like some historians argue that, and I mentioned it earlier, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, and I don't know if people know what it is, I'll try to very quickly tell you. In 1850, it was ruled that a law was passed that any slave who escaped slavery and made it to a free state had to be returned to the South, right? And that means both federal forces and individual white Northerners were required, not just, it wasn't a suggestion, it was a requirement that you had to return slave property to the South. That started a huge, kind of inflamed the anti-slavery movement in a really important way, because what the Fugitive Slave Law said was that slavery was a national institution, that the nation is now supporting it by requiring the free North to return property in humans to the South. And so this act really launched a whole, again, like got things rolling with anti-slavery movement all over again. And so that was one of the matches. I can kind of think of other cases, but I think looking less at, again, it's when we kind of turn not just to individuals like we do to John Brown, but to individual instance, we really lose the sweep of history. And that the Civil War did not happen. There was no one thing. This has been building since since
whatever,
the
right.
birth of slavery.
Yeah, and the Fugitive Slave Act really created a lot of problems for free states too, with the way legislation was in place. Specifically, I'm fascinated with the way Illinois was kind of a chess piece at that time, with the way they wanted to deal with other states financially or that they had business relationships with. It caused a lot of kidnappings. There's a great story that I'm working on about a Southern Illinois town called Equality, ironically enough, where a man named John Crenshaw was kidnapping runaway slaves and freedmen and selling them back north under the guise of the Fugitive Slave Act, saying that I have a right to return this property, but he would upsell them, basically. So there's so many unbelievable stories in our history that have not been told yet.
Yeah. And they happen in little places like Equality, Illinois. They happen, and some of that trickles up to the national consciousness. You can think about the Dred Scott case.
Right.
There's just so many episodes in this ongoing history, or if we want to say this ongoing march to the Civil War. So John Brown is just like a match, a particularly big match, if we want to say that. But the importance of his role would not have any meaning without the context of everything else that's going on.
Right. I think we have put a call out for questions. I'm not sure if there's anyone that has anything that they want to ask the professor. I don't know if those are coming up for us.
So guys, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand in the room, or you can type it in the room and I'll get it to Tyra.
In the meantime, Cynthia, what's the story that you want to get to the big screen? What would you love to see articulated in entertainment?
Oh my gosh. About slavery or about...
What's your favorite historical story that you wish people knew?
Oh, let's see, I wish you had given me this question before. I would actually have time to think about it, because I was thinking about a similar question just in terms of slavery, but I'm gonna think about that.
Oh, I think you froze. You're either really deep in thought or you froze. You froze.
I think I froze.
Yeah.
both deep.
Or both, yeah. But there's so many little stories that we will never know, because either the oral tradition wasn't maintained, or whoever wrote the history. I think there's that African I want to say it's an African proverb. People assign African to anything deep or thoughtful, but that until the lion learns to write, the hunter will always tell the story. So many things that have been lost that way.
Yeah. And the truth is, every one of us has stories. I mean, every one of our families, like we could just like sit down and figure out, how to collect the stories of our families. That would be amazing. But people have those stories in their, in their attics or in their basement. Or
written in a Bible.
In a Bible, right? Those stories are there. And there are ways, like historians have strategies for trying to kind of collect and gather stories that we find, that by traditional means we may not be able to get at. So one story that I think is important is, I don't know if you've heard of Celia the slave, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. She was a slave who, in 1855, she was purchased, I think, in 1850 by Robert Newsom in Missouri. Can't remember exactly. Had been, his plaything, right? So he abused her over several years until she was 19, and he had set her up in a house nearby his own home and the home of his family, but would visit her regularly. in this space. And one night he came to visit her. She was pregnant, and insisted, tried to force himself on her. She resisted, and she hit him over the head. It's a gruesome story.
Hmm.
Hit him over the head. He fell. She hit him again. At which point he died. She put his body in the fireplace and burned him to ashes. So the next morning, his family started looking for him, and assuming that's where he went looking for evidence of him. They found some evidence and pieced it together. So what's important about the case of Celia is it reflects this argument or this point that I was making earlier about how violence is so at the center of slavery, but also that the means of resisting that violence are also like really brutal, and are necessarily so. She was tried and eventually hung for killing Newsom. And what I think this case also reveals is just the ways that women had no control over their bodies. And we know this, right? But what we see in the case that eventually went to the Missouri Supreme Court was that there was no place, Black women, and certainly not enslaved women, had no recourse, right? They had no recourse. The defense tried to suggest or tried to argue that a Black woman or an enslaved woman had a right over her own body, but in the slave South, that was an impossibility. And the Supreme Court ruled, with the lower courts that that she was guilty, and so she was eventually hung. But there was a lot of news coverage surrounding her story, and just like Margaret Garner did for Toni Morrison in Beloved, which was another brutal way of resisting slavery. There's a way that you can create a narrative around this young woman's life to expose both the humanity and the struggle of Black women, and the ways and the fact that there is no recourse for Black women and Black communities in resisting, the violence at the heart of slavery.
Yeah, there is no shortage of these stories, and we have so much to learn from them. And we've got to find the initiative to do it ourselves. No one's going to spoon feed us these things. Thank you so much, Cynthia Blair, for your time and your insight. It's invaluable. And overall, what did you think of the series?
I'll be honest. At first, I was like, "How are we?
What is this?"
Yeah, exactly. What is it? Why am I laughing?
Right.
But eventually, I think I really came to appreciate it. I really do like it. I like how complex John Brown is. He is, I think, as David said, he's lunatic and he's right. And that a show can do that, and to pull you, to make you get to the point where you're like rooting for this lunatic, but a lunatic only because the system is so crazy itself.
Right.
And so I loved it. And there's some scenes in there, and the language, which I know is drawn from the novel, but is just so powerful.
Yeah.
And it's beautifully shot. I think it's wonderful. And Ethan Hawke was amazing.
Amazing. Yeah. Amazing. And like you said, a credit to James McBride, who created the frame for that story.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And I look forward to talking to you soon. I'm sorry.
Is there a way I could ask a question really quick?
Oh, sure.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jaden Carter. I'm in my freshman year of college, majoring in musical theater. And I've actually never even been taught about John Brown. I've grown up in Charleston, West Virginia, and they never taught about John Brown in school. So I was just curious, how many stories do you think are out there that Black children are not taught in school? And how excited are you to tell more stories so that Black children can learn about them through film or other ways that are more, easy for us to be able to learn other than school, since we're not being taught about these in school?
Is that for me or is that?
Yeah, Cynthia, I'll throw that to you. I would imagine it's innumerable.
Bam. It's innumerable, and I can throw out, you know, there's the narrative about slavery, and I have not looked at a high school or middle school textbook in quite a while, but there's a narrative that does not really show, in detail what slavery was and what it was to the building of the nation. So those stories, I'm hoping are trickling out. I think you were so right that, I write history books, and you're not going to read my history book because, it's not really, I hope you would, but I think finding a way to reach younger audiences, I think, and not just younger, but all audiences, through television and through innovative online programming as well as the film, I think is really important. And I'm hoping that there's like an opening, that this represents an opening, and an increasing opening for those kinds of stories, but also those kinds of visions, right? And artists and creatives who are those stories are out there, right? They're just not making their way to these spaces as quickly as they need to. So maybe what you can do as a student is become a historian, and as well as a filmmaker. And join the cause of making these stories available, accessible, but also deep and rich.
Thank you.
Yeah, the world and the media is yours. So
yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else? Anyone going once? Yeah, I spoke to
series. I didn't hear the first couple of minutes, so I'm curious what your thoughts are of the series.
I loved it. Like you, those first couple of episodes, it takes you a minute to figure out, to get your footing in what the narrative is. There's this fictional character, Onion, who is kind of stringing us through this. He's multi-layered, and so, but the way he's written gives you a real chance to have these conversations with Frederick Douglass that would not have exposed that part of his life any other way, because there's no other character to kind of hold that mirror up. What were the challenges he was facing? A lot of his personal life. There's some things that are obviously hyper portrayed in the series, but it's Google and Wikipedia are amazing things. And all of these really deep oddities that go along with celebrity that Frederick Douglass was impacted by. And there's a point in this series where we see them putting the team together that will be kind of the leads at the raid. And the storyteller makes a point to give you their first and last names. You can Google all of those people and they exist. You can find their pictures and stories about their families and what their educational background was. These are business owners and farmers and leaders in their community who decided, I'm gonna, like you said, take on this potentially martyring feat for a greater cause, when they could have very happily lived lives as freemen. These were all freemen, most of the people who were there as the base group. So I thought it was fascinating. I'm a big Ethan Hawke fan. I'm not shy about that. His performance is incredible as John Brown. Amazing.
And so I have to watch it again.
Yeah, I miss him. When it was over, I missed him. Yeah.
So it's amazing too. I'll make one more point. I was looking at the directors for each, and I love that. I think one was, Kevin Hooks, one was Darnell Martin, one, and I think maybe Kevin Hooks directed two, Darnell did one, and one of the Hughes brothers did.
Right.
The person, I was like, Now that is,
This is why, yeah.
I love it. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they've got a great project, and whatever award season looks like next year, I expect to see a bunch of those folks accepting honors for this work. It's really well done. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It was a fun conversation.
Yeah, and I'll talk to you on a side note. I'll talk to you soon. I've got another project I want to talk to you about. But thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
All right, let's bring in our team. Where's Lady D, Reggie, and Mark?
What's up?
Mr. Bosley, you tell us how many more minutes do we have to chit chat?
Boss man to give y'all about 5 or 10 more minutes. Oh, we good on time. It was great though. It was great conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely a great conversation. Yeah, a lot of the, like you guys mentioned, a lot of the unknown stories is interesting to see them come to light.
Yeah.
And the young lady that spoke, these are not stories that we learned in in school at all.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting to see a lot of these stories and historical facts come to light.
You know, with WGN, we did a story about why some of these things don't make it to history books or classrooms. And it's not for lack of effort. There's specifically here in Chicago, there's a guy named Pamon Rami who wrote a whole curriculum and presented it to Illinois and Chicago. It was not used, approved, but not used. You know, there's those little stories all over the place. And what I'm told the argument is that it's difficult to fit into the content of the class and that it's not going to be tested. Mm-hmm. So administrators, not teachers, because teachers want to teach it.
Right.
But
it's not going to be tested.
It's like, we don't have time. You got to get through this litany of stuff because it's what's on the test. The test scores determine what kind of standing the school has. The standing that the school has determines what kind of funding we can pursue. And then that's what the problem is.
Yeah, so it's no longer about teaching. It's about teaching the test, right, and not just teaching life skills.
Right.
So it sounds like they need to reevaluate the test and add some more Black history into that.
Right. Well, that's a long-standing debate. Is what do the tests really, beyond some point, what are you really determining with those standardized tests?
Exactly.
And are they fair to the whole swath of student population?
Yeah, it's very interesting to see how that will work out.
Yeah.
Yes. Wow. But yeah, it was definitely a great conversation. A historian, man, I wanted to. I was trying to catch up before she left, man. She was actually amazing.
Yeah.
A wealth of knowledge, and that was great. So it'd be good to have her back on the show as well, just to just dive into some more of Black history and just other things that we have going on in our world and just history. Because she was actually had some great knowledge, and of course, our one and only host, Tara. Those are questions, of course, you had was amazing. Of course, it's just, so it was just great. It was great. Definitely a great show, guys. And I love the fact that we had people engaging in it as well. I was really happy about the young lady coming on because she made a valid point. It was good to see that our millennials are really involved and want to know more about what's going on in this. Not just about, and there's nothing wrong with us touching on series about music or touching on series as it relates to basketball or football. There's nothing wrong with that, but to see them having a really love and a passion about learning our knowledge and our history about and being involved in that, it was just really great to see them in the room and to ask the questions. So that was really awesome.
Well, the truth of the matter is all entertainment is storytelling, and there's no stories more fascinating than the ones that are true. Truth is stranger than fiction every time. I mean,
That's true.
And whatever your faith tradition is, you can go to the Bible there's stuff in there.
Yes.
That on Knots Landing or Scandal or whoever else. It's better than any storyline they've got going right now.
There's some real soap operas in the Bible.
Life is amazing, and there's so many stories that should be told that haven't been told yet. So folks like that young lady who have an interest in storytelling and a talent for creativity. They are the key to getting that done.
Awesome.
Definitely.
Definitely. So again, great show, guys. Everybody, again, Tara, amazing job as always. So we're looking forward to next month where we're going to be touching on some of our Black entrepreneurs and some of the people that are doing things around the world and here in the city of Chicago as well. So we're looking forward to that. Great show Thursday, Saturday in November. You all mark the date. I don't know what the date is right now because I don't have the calendar in front of me. So that's one of y'all cue. That's one of y'all cue to help me out. Help me out. Somebody.
I don't know. All I know, Lady D, look up. I want to have a Brady Bunch moment. Look up for a second. Look up.
Look up.
November 21st.
You look up.
Look up.
See?
That's good. That's good.
I was listening to what you were saying, but all I was thinking is I want to do this.
That was good. I'm waving at you, Reggie.
Anyway.
He missed it. That was good. Awesome. All right.
So,
Well,
but before we go, Mark, we especially with the conversation that we just had on African American history and John Brown, I think it's important that we reiterate the fact that November 3rd is Election Day.
Right.
Yes.
And that everyone needs to go out and exercise your vote, exercise your right. You can do it early. You can do it by mail. You can, however you do it, please vote.
Yeah.
Good.
When we talk about people dying for that right, it's people that look like us, and it's all the way back in the 1800s, the John Browns of the world who fought, died, sacrificed most of his family and a number of other people to make sure that people of color, women, indigenous citizens all had the right to vote. So do not waste it.
Yes.
Please not. Please exercise your right to vote. Let your voice be heard. All right. Again, this is a historical election. And we always, as I said yesterday, we always say, this is one of the most important elections that we're going to ever have. And we always say that, but I really do believe this one right here, for real. We always say it. We say every time election comes, like, well, this is one of the most important elections, but for real, this time, this is right here. It's one of the most important elections we're going to ever have. So again, thank you guys for joining in. We're going to exit out and let our host close out. So you guys have a great day. We'll talk to you guys soon.
Bye. Bye. Bye.